curious.
I thought we were booked for two, John. What's going on? Why is there a delay here?
We're just about ready. Hang tight. This is Joe.
We're going on right now.
Johnny.
We're actually starting right now, guys. Here we go. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're live.
Welcome back, folks, to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, or City of Demons, as many of you would like to call it. And we are an international show, of course, starting with our home base, United Public Radio Network, UPRN, as well as their AM and FM terrestrial affiliates, not to mention their very own FM station, 107.7 UPRN, live in New Orleans. Dr. J Radio now, Live. I'm your host, Dr. I mentioned J, that this is the program radio network carries this show. That has probably been the longest running co-host of mine on this show since the history of me being on air, which is about 7 years, starting in May. It's a pretty darn long time, actually, now that I think about it that way. That happens to be the one and only Johnny Webb. On top of that, we have our guests who also are across the Atlantic pond, and they happen to be Mr. Philip Kinsella, as well as his twin brother, Mr. Ronald Kinsella. So I guess both of you, Mr. Kinsella, so I might as well just talk about your first name. So let me say hello, Philip. Hello, Ronnie.
Hello, Dr. J. This is Philip.
Hello, Dr. J. This is Ronnie.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and I gotta say, Johnny has told me so much about you, and from the very first time he told me about, briefly about your experiences, I was like, oh, I have to talk to him, and I'm very grateful Johnny was able to work this out. Johnny, let me introduce you while you're on real quick. Come on in and say hi.
Hey, Dr. J. Good. Happy New Year to you. And I've been listening to your shows and watching them grow and grow. So I'm very happy for you. And I'm happy to be able to bring Philip and Ronnie here this evening to give their expressions and their experiences over the years.
And you mentioned their experiences, and that happens to be the focus of today's show. If you all know, I've always been saying this. Okay, when I look, for instance, Preston Dennett's book, UFOs over California, UFOs over Colorado, all those different states he wrote, there's 2 chapters that I always go to. The first is crash and retrievals. I always love that because there's so many of them. The second is abductions and contact. The reason why I pay so much attention to people who have had interaction with extraterrestrials, either via abduction or contact, is because if you all want the answers of what is going on, who better to speak to than people who've actually interacted with these non-terrestrial entities, intelligent entities at that. So that is the topic of today. So I'm going to go back in time, and I'm going to start with you, Ronnie. Let's first paint us a picture of how old you were, where you were, and what exactly happened the very first time you were abducted by extraterrestrials. And while you're telling it, Ronnie, what kind of ETs?
Okay, I'll give it my best shot. The incident happened when I was living in Luton, a town in England, and it was in 1982. Now, at that time, I had no interest in UFOs. There wasn't much literature on it, not that I saw. We didn't have the internet or anything then, but an incident occurred. Firstly, with my grandmother, we witnessed a silver orb over her head, and this was the summer prior to the incident that occurred with me afterwards. But it started with this ball, this sphere, this silver sphere over her head, and it was very surreal. It was very odd for a 13-year-old to see something like that. Is very bizarre. That was the first time I'd seen anything abnormal. The actual incident with these alleged ETs was in the winter after that, when I was in this Victorian house. We lived in Luton, and it was just one night I was lying in bed, and I know it sounds crazy, but I was taken up, and it wasn't a dream or sleep paralysis. I'm very level-headed. I was taken up to this dark shape in the sky, and this thing, I couldn't really discern what the shape was, but it was there. And the next thing I remembered was I was in this sort of like modern wheelchair. I'd awoken somehow, I don't know why, but I'd awoken. Thank God I did, because I remembered it. I was in this kind of very modern wheelchair, and I realized there was a presence behind me. I knew it was male, but I couldn't see him. But ahead of me, I could see these, what I call doctors. Now, the strange thing about these doctors was that they were clad from head to toe. They were so camouflaged. They had visors over their eyes. I could not even see their eyes. They were taller than us, but there were three of them ahead of me and one behind. Now, I knew the one behind me was in charge. Now, behind them, just behind them, there was a table, and it was like an operating theatre. That's why, hence I call them doctors, but there was something very odd about them, very, very odd. I cannot remember the colour of their uniforms. I don't know if they were white or silver, but they were there, and they wore gloves. They even wore gloves. Well, when I'd woken up, behind me, this one, they obviously realised they were startled. He said, the first thing he said in fluent English was, "We're going to perform an operation on you, Ronald." Now, when he said my name, I flinched. I absolutely flinched, because he knew who I was, but I didn't know who he was, and I couldn't see him. I was slightly paralyzed in the chair. I could move to a degree, but I couldn't turn my head to discern him. And, well, this was horrific, because I don't know why. I just knew it was to do with the head. I just knew they were going to do something in the head. And I remembered pleading with him. Now, they weren't malicious. They were quite nice, but it was this procedure they were going to do. And I remembered pleading with him. I remembered saying to him, "I don't want the operation. Please, I don't want this at all." And he then told me very comfortingly, "No, this has to be done for your own good, but we will not harm you." Now, what he produced then, I saw his gloved hand, and to the left of me, he produced this instrument. It looked like a needle, but it had a nodule on the end. And all he did was, I saw this instrument and part of his gloved hand, and he tapped it on the palm of my hand. Well, that was it. I was out. The next part was, the next part was absolutely horrific. This was the worst of it. I've written about this, as I've documented this years ago. This is the worst of it. I was dropping from the thing. Now, I don't know why, but going up wasn't a problem. Coming down was, because as I was dropping, I distinctly recall feeling this pulse running through me. It was like a pulse. Every hair on my body was static. It was as if I was electrified. Now, I didn't have this going up, but I certainly had it going down. Now, I came through the loft of the house, and as I dropped down, I reached the bed. I could see it. Now, they laid me on my back. The worst of it is when I hit the bed, there was a bump. That was a realization. I was awake all the way through it, but it was the physical contact with this bed, my bed, that completely horrified me. And then they showed me something, and it took me many years, because I never saw them again. This is when I was 13, and this is before communion. This is before any kind of. I wasn't even interested in UFOs. We didn't have any literature much about it then. If you needed it, you had to go to the library. But I remembered looking up, and I was still cocooned in this electrified magnetic field thing, whatever it was. And as I looked up, they did something which I felt was rather nasty, and I've never forgotten it. I've never forgotten this damn thing. They projected, and I knew it was a projection. At 13, I mean, in 1982, technology was improving, but it wasn't brilliant. I knew it was a hologram. They projected this across the ceiling in full view of me. It was massive. This enormous head of a Cheshire cat. It was evil looking. It had sharp teeth. It was grinning at me. Now, I knew it was a hologram because it was wavering. The hologram was wavering, and that was absolutely horrifying. And this Cheshire Cat, the head of him, grinning at me, was there for perhaps about a minute. And then he dissipated. He went. Now, in 1982, I mean, even now, but it was worse back then, you couldn't tell anyone about it. You couldn't speak to your
you would have been ridiculed.
Of course, you couldn't speak. And I didn't understand the literature. I didn't know what that was. To me, that I had no idea what was going on. I had absolutely no idea. Now, something very interesting happened after that. I'm physically fit. I have been from day one. Nothing wrong with me. I was sitting in school not long after this, and we were doing geography. I was very bored, stiff boarding in school, as most of us are. I hated geography. And I suddenly had these 3 massive striking pains running through my head. Bang, bang, bang. They were so severe. I can get this on record. I collapsed. I fell onto the pupil beside me. I went onto the floor and I fitted for about, I think, a couple of minutes. I was fitting. They pulled me out of class. And why is it teachers ask you stupid questions? The first thing they asked was, did you have breakfast? Well, I would think it would be a bit more severe than that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, what happened after that? They did ask me, because it's neurological, they asked me to go and see a doctor. I absolutely refused. I was terrified then after of doctors. I did not want to see a doctor. How I got away with it, I don't know, but I refused to see one. I had a banging headache. Now, years later, I always try to work out what the Cheshire Cat was, what symbolism he had, or what connection he had with the doctors, as I call them. I don't know what they were. They were so heavily disguised, I couldn't see what they were at all. The Cheshire Cat, I suddenly figured after a long time of thinking about this, that is it possible that they were so smart, these entities, whatever they did, and I'll tell you something else that happened after that, what this has done. Whatever they did, they can read us very well. They can pluck things out of the mind. I always call them masters of deception. But what they did was, because I had evidently disturbed them through their procedure, I don't know why I'd woken up. Why did they allow me to? If they're that advanced, why did I just wake up? Evidently, they couldn't do it. It was a surprise to them, and I did feel surprised when I was in with them. But could it be possible that because when I was younger, and no disrespect to Lewis Carroll, I had seen a program called, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland,
Yes.
with my grandparents. I admitted I'd watched it. I wasn't really interested in it. Because they realized I had woken up, they thought they would scramble the entire thing by projecting the cat, or their version of it, which was absolutely horrific. I've never forgotten his face. Even today, it haunts me. I still see that godforsaken, terrible nightmare face they projected. Could it be possible that in doing so, in projecting that to me all, they would know or feel comfortable with the fact that if I went to see a psychologist who would say, well, if you saw the Cheshire Cat, you're obviously getting confused with Alice in Wonderland. What you've done is you're mixing fact with fiction, and I would do anything but. And so that was extremely bizarre. It's the only thing I can think of why I was shown that godforsaken thing. In fact, ironically, the cat, was worse than them. The doctors weren't so bad, but the operation was. But strangely, after that, I began to see the UFOs, and I'd never seen them before, apart from the one over my grandma's head, every 2 or 3 years. And that's exactly what happened as it stands. Now, when you tell people about this experience, they will categorically deny it. They will say, firstly, I'm not mad. I'm level-headed. I would hope to think I'm level-headed. Yes, I'm imaginative. This is the curse that comes with it, because I write fiction. They will assume that you've imagined it. It's a comfortable thing to just suggest that you imagined it. But I was 13 then. As I said, I've never seen them again. I don't know what they did, but strangely afterwards, I began to see the UFOs. And I didn't want anything to do with this topic at all. I had no interest in it. Even then, when we were younger, we had psychics and mediums. I didn't even believe them. I mean, I believe we had a famous one when I was younger, called Doris Stokes, and terribly, I used to say Doris Stokes, friend or hoax. I never believed her, but I was so wrong. And it was a slap in the face for me. So, Dr. J, that is my experience I've had with the so-called entities. And it was quite horrific. The face of the Cheshire Cat, I have never forgotten him. As I said, the incident was so profound. Years later, I decided to document it in a book, which I did about in 2012. I documented this after seeing other numerous ships as well, one of them being triangular and up close, actually.
The ship triangular, was it? I don't want to, I guess I might as well ask you the color, because a lot of people describe triangular ships as being black.
Yes, it was black, but it wasn't as they had described. This ship wasn't, because after the incident with the doctors and I see these UFOs, I developed an interest in them. Well, I wanted to know what they were. Are they projections of our psyche? Are they from another dimension? Are they from outer space? We still are none the wiser, but we can form conclusions or opinions of what we think what best suits the picture of them. The triangular ship was a separate thing entirely from the doctors. This happened about 8 years ago. This is what caused me and all the rest to write this book, Twin Souls, which I had done by Capital Ban. The triangular ship, it was black, and I've only seen one of them once. I'd never thought I'd see them. But it wasn't sharply cornered as they illustrate in magazines. Certainly not sharp at all. It was rounded. The corners were beautifully rounded.
Like
and
the Belgian ship in the 80s, the Belgian wave. It wasn't like a sharp corner. The corners of those triangular ships were also rounded.
Yes. And also, it was heavily thick-set. It wasn't narrow, as people had illustrated in magazines. This was extremely thick-set. You could get quite a number of decks on that thing, and it was gigantic. I would say it was probably the size of 2 or 3 football fields, and I'm not elaborating. And it passed overhead low enough. There was no discernible girders beneath it. There was not one light on it, because it was daylight. I saw it. It was about 9:15 in August. It was 7:15 in August. And the sun was still out, and there were no discernible engines. There was no lights on it, and it had no girders. I couldn't see the top as it was passing overhead. It was massive. It was as silent as anything. It was traveling the speed of a plane, but it gradually glided overhead. And what I did discern on it, because the sun was reflecting on the side of it, I could see these grooves, machine grooves, running along the side of this thing. And it just casually passed overhead. And all I kept thinking when I saw it was, the only thing that was going through my mind, it looked as heavy as lead. It was like shiny tar, actually. It wasn't black. It was like shiny black tar. There were no lights on it, no discernible equipment or machinery. It looked like it'd been molded. But there was these grooves, and I kept thinking to myself, or kept saying to myself, how on earth can something like that, as heavy as lead, hang as light as a feather?
Before I turn the questions over to Philip, let me just make a couple comments. First of all, the fact that you described such a massive ship is, a lot of people have described it. I know even in Phoenix, the Phoenix Lights, even though a lot of people say it was more not triangular, more of a boomerang, most people actually, in fact, did see a triangle, a black triangle going slowly across Phoenix. I believe there was over 10,000 witnesses, yes. And that too was massive, massive. Now, here's the question going back to your first abduction. When you said, Ronnie, that they spoke English to you, did their mouths move, or was this telepathy?
No, I don't know. This is what I can't answer. They were completely masked from head to toe. They wore masks. I couldn't even see their eyes. So for that, I cannot answer that. I have no idea.
Well, one more quick question about this. The English that was spoken to you, did it sound like your voice, somebody else's voice, and also were the words or the sentences spoken broken English, or was it perfectly fluent and words that you would say?
Right. The voice that I heard wasn't mine. It was of a mature male, but they were slightly broken, just slightly. It was rather stiff.
Interesting, very interesting. Now I'm going to turn this over to you, Philip. So now we know about Ronnie, the first time he had this interaction, or at least that you recall, Ronnie, in 1982. Philip, when did you first have contact? And can you take us back to, just like I asked Ronnie, give us the setting and the circumstances of what happened?
Yes, Dr. J, I'll explain as best that I can. I mean, the same as Ronnie, I never had any real interest in mediums, other than the other event of seeing the silver orb over our grandmother. My brother and I were both there present at that time when that occurred. But the real event that shattered my concept of reality happened in the winter of 1989, where we had then moved to a small village away from Luton, to a village called Marston Mortain. And my brother and I, we work in the same department store, and we'd come home. And at that point, I didn't drive. I drive now, but we used to get a train back along this old country road. And on this particular night, we'd come home, and my mum was out working, and my sister and the dog were at home. And we used to live in a small cul-de-sac, a fairly large house in the cul-de-sac, and we'd come into the front door that was all frosted glass and through the hall into the kitchen. And what had happened was that as a drink was being made, I had my back so that I had a peripheral viewpoint of the hall directly in front of me, where the frosted glass doors were and windows. And our dog started to react quite strangely because there was this feeling of a change in the atmosphere. It's very hard to explain, but it was almost as if the atmosphere was supercharged with some type of electrical current. And all of a sudden, there was the dog started to growl, and the dog was in front of me, in front of the breakfast bar. And I was behind that, where the kitchen cabinets were. And all of a sudden, the only way I can explain it to you that was really very strange was that there was a flash of light that came through the frosted glass doors. And I thought, first of all, that a car had come straight up the drive. But then what actually was happening was that the glass itself was bending, and this is where it gets really weird, because this has been documented, and I suffered unfortunately through the media machine with regards to this, because a lot of people don't understand. But this small entity, I could only explain, was about 3 foot tall, all clad in black, with what I assumed was some type of motorcycle helmet, because from my understanding or my processing of what I was looking at defied physics. But in those split moments when it came through the door, then it ran through to our downstairs bedroom stroke study that my brother and I had, because it was a large area. You had a shower room and a study and a bedroom. And then the dog was barking, and I was frozen. And I'm sorry, I forgot to state, which also has been documented, my brother, just before it came through the door, went into a trance as this electrical current was occurring, and his face turned up to the ceiling, and he said something very strange. He said, "There's going to be an earthquake, or grandma's going to die." And at that point, our maternal grandmother was still alive, and that was something that was very bizarre. And after questioning Ronnie about that, he has no idea why he said what he said, or the conditions surrounding why he suddenly froze and looked up. And then what happened when the being, or whatever it was, shot through to the downstairs study stroke bedroom, which was ours, it then ran across in front of me, up across the hall and up the stairs. And at this point, I turned around behind me to get a knife, and I said, "There's an intruder in the house." And I shouted, "There's an intruder in the house." And then that strange atmosphere changed. It just went back to normal, and we searched the house, and there was nothing in the house. Now, that night, there was another part to this that it's a little bit lengthy, but I'll try and shorten it as best as I can because of time. But I found myself, and this is where a lot of things have changed for me in terms of theoretical debate and quantum stuff and everything. But I found myself floating, I think it was in the early hours of the morning, from the downstairs study stroke bedroom on my back, levitated up. There was no one around me. I was just feeling as if I was being forcibly moved through doors. So I'm coming back through the hall. I'm coming through the kitchen door, through it. And as I'm going through the door, suspended on my back, levitated, I can't move. Although I'm aware of what's going on, I can't move. And the thing that shocks me is that I'm actually passing through doors. And this moving of the body on my back, levitated probably about, I'd say about 3 feet off the floor. I'm coming through to the kitchen door and out through the conservatory, and I'm being turned upwards all round so that I'm now looking up at the sky. And in this experience that seemed ethereal and dreamlike, but also very real, because my awareness was focused on what was going on. There were all these UFOs coming through the sky, and I thought, my goodness me, there they are, they're real. You know, I've never really understood them, but they're here. And then there was a whoosh, and I felt myself being raised up, and there was a craft that seemed suspended. The others were moving, and then I blacked out. And when I woke up, that was the beginning of what I would call the horror, because you know, don't you, Dr. J, you've heard of these abductions, these UFO abductions. I'm sure you've heard of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've talked to several people who have been taken, as well as the people who've dealt with them, like Dr. David Jacobs, Yvonne Smith, hypnotherapists, and even prior to his passing, Dr. Roger Lear, great friend of mine before he passed away, who was the alien implant doctor.
Yes, that's correct. And I found myself, the only way I can explain it to you, and it really was psychologically disturbing. And I've spent all these years trying to work out, which I still can't work out what happened or how it happened, but it's led me into a different area of, debate with regards to what it possibly could be. I found myself laying on this medical bed, I suppose you would call it. The first reaction that occurred was that when I woken up, I was stunned. You know, when you're disorientated and you wake up, you don't know where you are, you don't know what's happened. And I found myself naked, very embarrassingly naked, and strapped to this bed. I couldn't move. And to my right, there were these three, well, it's ridiculous to state because, you know, I'm a very logical person, but there were these three tall reptilians that did not communicate, but seemed to be in this mist. And they seemed to be in this, you know, going backwards and forwards from side to side. It was a very strange stance. And I remembered being so shocked at seeing them that I then kind of like woke up even more, as it were. And then I found that they had placed something into the lower part of the anatomy. So, yeah, okay, the big deal. People say you're probed. People laugh about it, joke about it. And I understand also the way that the media have handled this with me. I've dealt with that now. I'm cool with it. But when you are in a situation where that is happening, I can assure you of one thing: it is not pleasant. And the other thing that I found interesting with regards to this so-called probing was that it felt organic, and it felt where they'd placed it inside the body was very much it felt almost organic in the stomach area. And at that point, when I realized what was in me, was that I started to scream and yell for them to take it out. And what I felt in that scenario was a feeling of total degradation, and like I was just a piece of meat. I was nothing. And then when I screamed and yelled, this gray, well, people call them grey, it was a cream-coloured thing, I suppose you'd call it, came over, and I seemed to be released from the mechanism. The lower part of the object, whatever it was, had been retracted, and I was ordered to dress. And there was another part to the experience that is very bizarre, but, you know, we're going to be here all night if I'm talking about that. So the experience I had back in 1989 shattered my concept of reality. In those days, no one, and I had physical marks. I had 3 triangular marks behind my right ear. I had continuous nosebleeds to the right nostril, and I found it very difficult to walk for a while. In those days, there was no one that you could really talk to. I know that Jenny Randalls, who's our British ufologist, did communicate with my brother and myself when I'd written. I'm sure I'd written to her to discuss this, and we had a long chat about it. But in those days, Dr. J, there was no one really that you could talk to. And of course, I could not measure the experience because there was nothing to measure it by. We have the internet, we have a wonderful array of communication. And of course, we have to be careful of those people who are not legitimate and the fakes. But and that normally they're found out quite easily. But in those days, there was no way of measuring the experience. It was only in later years when, like Ronald said, we started to see UFOs. And, this is the bit where it gets really cranky. We're identical twins, and we are imaginative. We've written children's books and science fiction. And this is the really nasty part, that when you're dealing with this type of phenomena and that you yourself have experienced something of this kind, it doesn't do you any good because, one, most of the public don't understand, and 2, you're left with the emotional trauma and scars of the experience itself. So from that moment onwards, I was determined to find out what it was. And we did belong to the Whitley Strieber Communion Network because we had both of us had these experiences. We wrote to Whitley Strieber, and when he wrote a note back or something, and he linked us with this communion network. And unfortunately, we had a lot of letters from people that we couldn't understand because it seemed so far out. So that was the starting of the experiences from the UFO aspect, or for the major part of what people would call an abduction. So, are they real? Yes, but I believe that the process that is employed by these said interdimensional beings, or whatever they are, is so out of our current framework of reality that this is why we're chasing our tail, trying to find out what they are.
This is a question for both of you. So either one who wants to answer in order, but I obviously want answers from both of you. Philip, after Ronnie was taken, were you aware of what happened to him? Did you guys have a discussion, and did you believe it? And Ronnie, after Philip was taken, did Philip come to you and talk about it? You guys started to compare notes.
Okay, well, Dr. J. Ronald did tell me about the experience. I was well aware of what had happened, especially with the Cheshire Cat. And I had also been in the classroom when he had fitted. And what was really horrible was the fact that, most of the pupils, they just treat you like you're a piece of dirt. So sure, he did have that experience. It's something that has still puzzled him to this day. Do we have answers? No. But yes, he did tell me about the experience, and I was present when he'd fitted, and that happened with him, yeah.
What about you, Ronnie? What do you say?
Yes, Philip told me about his experiences. He was very disturbed afterwards. As a matter of fact, he had some marks behind his ear. I think they were a triangular red mark, and we didn't have digital cameras then. I don't think we did, but we had a Polaroid. And I tried to photograph it, but it didn't come out very well. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but it just couldn't take it. But there was a discernible mark on his ear, yes.
Johnny Webb's got a question real quick. Johnny, hop in. Johnny Webb. Johnny, we can't hear you.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Philip and Ronald. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I realise, that for a lot of people listening, the inquisitiveness is what really goes on, and what happens to experiences, and that obviously you've elocuted yourselves very clearly about what's happened. But Philip, from this situation, you had an experience where you've become a medium. Like, Ronnie and yourself have both talked about not understanding or thinking anything about mediumship or anything like that. But then something happened to you, and with these experiences that have caused you to come aboard with that. And the other thing was that also you talk about what is like your hypothesis, and I'd like you to share that with us as well. So anyway, I'll leave it back to you.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, it couldn't get any worse, could it really? I mean, seeing UFOs and then talking to the dead, I thought my reputation would go from the top right down to the bottom. The clairvoyant part, I think we're all clairvoyant to a degree, started when my maternal grandmother passed over. And she was psychic, but not to the level of doing clairvoyance. She knew things. And this is where this UFO, or this orb thing, this eye, as Ronnie called it, and I agree with him, hung over her head when we were kids in the garden that summer's day. But what actually happened was that I had gone to see a medium, and she used to work for the FBI in America. She was a British lady, and they used her for cold soul cases to find bodies that the police couldn't find. And she read for me and told me that you're psychic. And she also picked up that about the UFOs. She didn't tell me where they came from, and she said that you'll bridge the gap, towards the psychic and UFO phenomena. And I didn't understand what she meant by that. But most of what she brought through was factual. I'm like you guys, level-headed and factual. I don't deal with nonsense. Well, I went on to explore clairvoyance because I wanted it proven to myself that life wasn't just meaningless, that we weren't biological machines with a sell-by date that just lived and died, and that consciousness was extinguished. That made no sense to me. And also going back to the experiences that not only my brother had, but I myself had, that I was puzzling over why this happened and how it happened. We later learned that, it could possibly be a faction of what people call greys. And it was at that point where the exploration of consciousness and also the study of ufology seemed to amalgamate a theoretical model of what we could perhaps be dealing with here. With regards to the UFO subject, we've always been taught to believe by the system that we are actually dealing with nuts and bolts craft, physical crafts. I am not disputing that, but the ways that the greys operate or seem to operate through all of the research material that I've read indicates that they are much more than just physical entities. For instance, when an abduction is taking place, they're able to remove you through walls and doors, and they, as spectres, also are able to come through walls and doors. Now, I didn't have any grey come to get me. I was forcibly being removed through the house on my back on my own. But looking at the data shows me that how are they able to do that? And also I started looking into the hypothesis of the hybridization program. When an abduction is taking place, it is very similar to the near-death experience when someone has an NDE, when they die and they go down a tunnel towards a light. The difference being is that the NDE, in more cases than not, is positive, whereas the abduction phenomena is negative. Now, the abductee normally forgets the experience or can't remember, and we know that, astronauts who go out in space sometimes have these moments where they can't explain what that feeling is when they've been taken out of our Earth matrix. So my hypothesis led me to understanding that the greys are perhaps, or a faction of them, are outside our frequency of reality. So through my theoretical work, I thought, well, what are the greys then? Why are they interested in us? Why are they interested in reproduction? Why are they interested in personality and soul? And I understood that as sentient beings ourselves, that we do have what I believe is a soul that transcends this space-time continuum, and that we perhaps go through a process of incarnation and reincarnation, which seemed plausible, because if we were just biological machines, we're just too damn brilliant for us just to live and die. There was much more to this. So my study led me even further into what the greys really represented. and I came up with a hypothetical model of what that possibility could be. And that led me then into the research of cloning and the dangers of cloning humans. So would you, Dr. J, like me to explain the theoretical model that I've developed? And it is only a theoretical model.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if I cloned you, Dr. J, in a laboratory, and taking into consideration that you are a spiritual entity, that you have a soul, that you've incarnated through the natural process of gestation and come into this loop of incarnation, reincarnation, going backwards and forwards to the other side, memories, experiences. Let's use that for the moment as the reality of what happens when we die. Now, if I cloned you physically, your physical clones will only have the memory of one single life, which means that they would not have come through the correct channel of reproduction as you have, that they would only have one physical life and one physical memory. Now, when you die, when you physically die, my belief is that you will return back to the other side, call it what you will, heaven, Nevada, the pleasant plains, reality, as I call it, the quantum realm. You'll return back there. But the clones of you, I believe, are not strong enough, because when the physical copy dies, I believe a spark of that consciousness, which has been impressed in this life, does not have enough energy to return back to the other side. And if the Greys have done this themselves, if they've cloned themselves, then it's possible that their souls, or spark of a soul, not in terms of our soul, is too weak to get back to where their masters have gone. And they perhaps have created themselves as a one hive mind consciousness, which is so strong it's able to penetrate through to this realm and, interlink with us through our consciousness. What's interesting is that the Greys are interested in reproduction. This is another question that we have to look at, because why are they interested in hybridization? We hear these stories of them, coming and getting people, and then we hear about these females who are carrying a hybrid, and that they lose the hybrid after, a month or so after its gestation period. And then you have these stories where the mother is brought onto the crafts to try and bond with that hybrid. The Greys seem to be very interested in introducing love and compassion, elements that they don't have. So I believe it's possible that the Greys, in their present form of damnation, are trying to recreate a process of incarnation or reincarnation within themselves. That is, I'm not saying that's all of the Greys, because we're human. We also have a soul. We're physical and we're also spiritual. And that applies also to other Greys that are really physical, and not those entities which have passed over to their dimension or their spirit world, not quite like ours. But there are other elements to that hypothetical model which I've been working on, and it's a little bit difficult to explain in about 10 or 15 minutes, because there are other avenues that I need to point to which strengthens the cause, or may strengthen the cause of what these creatures are. They could indeed be robots, synthetic robots. They could be a consciousness that's utilized a material body, synthetic body, to transfer space-time, so that that they don't have to go through the hazardous elements that we actually we suffer through when we go into space. So looking at the Greys, they're very multi-complex. They're able to communicate. They have no empathy. They have no understanding of love, of time, of all these attributes that make us what we are. And that kind of like made me think, well, what are they? They seem plastic. They seem as if they trying to recreate themselves through us.
I've actually heard that quite a few times. And one more thing to add to that, I've actually heard that these Greys, bio-robots, as a lot of people call them, not the taller ones that seem to be in charge, but the shorter ones, which are essentially the workers, that because they are basically bio-robots, clones, they don't have a soul. And that is why they're always interested in taking our soul. Have you heard that theory before?
I have indeed, but I think this encompasses things that we're exploring here with regards to life after death, continuation, and also the dangers of cloning humans. But certainly I have heard that before. But my argument is that they're obviously interested in the human soul. They're interested in attributes that make us what we are, what we've become. They themselves do not seem to be part of that. They seem to be outside the field of creation itself from our standard viewpoint. I mean, as I said, it's just a theory, and it doesn't have any basis for proof or factuality at all. It's just something that I'm working on with regards to soul survival, reincarnation, incarnation, our connection with the spirit world, and also other interdimensional beings. And of course, it's fascinating to speculate with regards to the greys, because there is another element that I'm working on with regards to the quantum realm, or the realm of possibilities, where I'm working on a thesis or a model whereby, within that quantum state, all things are possible, and that we ourselves, as sentient beings of the consciousness, are able to link into that realm, but to create anything we want. We can pull it through by utilizing the mind, creating everything around us if we have the tools. So the mind is a very powerful tool. It's a window to other alternative dimensions. And is it possible that things can connect through that consciousness? I believe that's possible.
Johnny Webb's got another question. Go ahead, Johnny.
Obviously, Philip, with that, hypothesis, I look at it as someone listening in to what you're saying, and I would think about children that are born through, say, IVF and sort of artificial insemination, and then I think of things like Dolly the sheep, and I wondered, is there a similarity to that? And that's not being disrespectful to people that are born through that method, that are here among us. But the question also asks, as your mediumship, are these beings with souls through this method on the earth that we live among humans today? Because there is a big debate, recently about cloning humans and what would be the benefits and the non-benefits, and certainly what would be the sort of ethical side of things. Are you able to elaborate on any of that understanding with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I said, there's no way of proving it. All we have is the reports and the witness statements of what the greys are. I mean, we can argue this for hours, and I love that. I think it's important to debate and come up with different hypotheses. Most of them may be wrong, most of them may be right. We don't know. What we've got to understand, though, is that, as we are physically here as flesh beings in this world, you and I and everyone else, we also have a soul. That's another part that we believe is omnipresent. We can't touch. It's wispy. And that's why I say to people, consciousness operates on a level where the human body and the brain itself literally is the antenna for consciousness, to bring consciousness into this realm, into this awareness. Can that be fabricated? Yes, I believe it can. I believe that, that could be created. But when it comes to elements of the soul, when you see IVF, I think through the normal processing of gestation, or the natural channel of the pre-birthing cycle, I'm sure that is the beginning of the cycle of bringing the consciousness in from the other side through this channel. If we start setting that balance on a medical level or genetic level, I don't know. I can't answer that question, and I wouldn't want to, because I'm not judge and executioner. I have no right. But if that is at all possible, if this is what's happening, where that spark from the clones of consciousness that does not have the same strength or imprint that this original copy had, cannot return back to the other side, then my thesis is that, as this one hive consciousness, these greys have amalgamated themselves in a force that is able to penetrate our realm, rather like, healers. Not touching someone can affect the biosphere of a person, or poltergeists on a very low level are able to infiltrate this dimension, this plane of dimension that we're in. So the greys are forcibly, what they're doing is that they're forcibly taking people, and they obviously, the entire operation is covert. Their covert operation. They don't want anyone to know about it. And this is where, if they're dealing with a hybridization program, why are they doing it? Is it because they want to bring a cloned army onto the planet? You know, Dr. David Jacobs, who I met in Arizona, believes that's the case. I will not dispute his theory. But at the same token, we've got to look at why the Greys are doing what they are doing. They're interested in us as a species and also in human reproduction. It could even be possible, and this has been said before, that it could be us from the future coming back to correct a problem where we ourselves are going through some type of devolution. You know, we can't denounce any of those theories, but as I said, I think it has a lot to do with consciousness, creation, and our continuation beyond this sphere. Most definitely, yes.
Let me change gears slightly and flip this over to Ronnie. First of all, have you gained any psychic powers by coming into contact? And the other half of this question is, it might be a little personal, but a lot of people claim that, for instance, from females, ova was taken, sperm being taken from men, and then they create these fetuses that are placed back in women and then removed after usually about the first, within, I don't know, 12 weeks or so, something like that. And then they are essentially put in some sort of tubes on a ship, or something for them to actually be able to be born, and then down the line they're later shown their children. So the other half to you, Ronnie, is since you were puberty age in 1982, 13 years old, do you know if they took any of your sperm? And if so, was there any subsequent abduction where they may have shown you some of your children?
No, I can't answer that. I have no memory other than what they told me they were going to do, which was the operation. They didn't specify what they were going to operate on, but I don't know why I just had this impression it was to do with the head. That was my own impression. It was very strong at the time. As for alternative abductions, no, if they have, I've never remembered it. But that was the only time I was taken from these from my home in Luton by these so-called doctors. Can I continue? Can I branch out on that, Dr. J, a little bit?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because this incident occurred, I went to the library much later, and I was confused. You see, I was confused because I was reading these stories about these people who had had these wonderful encounters with these beings, telling them that they're concerned for Earth and that they were very worried about the way in which humanity was going. Well, this really did confuse me, because I came to a conclusion not long ago that this concern could either be projected to them, or it could be a lie, or they could have told them a lie. I mean, I might be completely wrong, but I'll give you an example of this about these entities, that these people proclaiming that they're concerned about the Earth. They may well do so, but my argument is this, is that in your great country, there have been many sightings of UFOs, and a lot of which have approached military complexes, and some of the ships have disabled some of the weapons. I believe they've actually been able to disarm missiles, and this is allegedly. This is
a very common occurrence.
Yes. Now, if they are so concerned, I would say personally, on a personal level, that this is an illusion. They are demonstrating concern by illustrating their goodness in just nullifying a number of weapons. If they were so concerned and they had this power at their disposal, they could most easily, sweep aside all nuclear weapons, denuclearize them, pulverize them. And we think, right, we'll build some more. They'll do it again, and we get a slap on the hand and think, oh, right, we get the message. They haven't done that. This is the thing that confounds me about these entities, these aliens, because if they were so concerned, they could just intervene in that manner. They could give a demonstration, a powerful demonstration, without showing themselves, like an unseen force. It's like a game of cat and mouse. They're like shadows. And I think, to be honest with you, on a whole, I think if they're covert and they are deceptive. I don't think it's very good. I don't know exactly what we're dealing with. This is why you have your wonderful pioneers on here who try and form, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. They're trying to put the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle in place to form a picture of what is going on. And unfortunately, these beings seem to be always one step ahead of us. I mean, like myself, with the doctors, and they showed me that godforsaken terrible cat. I mean, they're always like shadows. You can have no proof. They will give you no proof whatsoever. You're left with absolute scarred memories and nothing more.
Philip, what do you say?
Well, I think that there are quite a few species. I can't prove that because the only experience that I had with regards to what people would call greys or a grey is that I had a very terrifying experience, and I can only measure my experience from that. However, it doesn't mean to say that I don't dispute there being benign entities. But at the same token, my research has been very much involved with the greys themselves, as we call them. They are fascinating, and I think that my mind has been working towards a deeper understanding on a psychological level of what we are dealing with. Now, I did mention about the quantum realm and about, dual wave consciousness, and especially particles that are observed. They can become physical and then they break down into a wave. Consciousness, I think, our consciousness works in the same way, where those thoughts that are not really strongly generated fold back into the quantum realm, as it were. And I believe that did we, from a primordial state, come from that place of total potentiality? Did we forcibly move our consciousness into this physical realm and manifest ourselves through the development of nature? We're not sure. But at the same token, I believe that if these greys are from that state within the quantum realm, or call it the quantum realm, another dimension, that are actually trying to self-realize themselves from not just an idea, but now trying to bring themselves into full form through us, by way of us, and understanding us. Does that make them evil? No, I'm not saying that they're evil at all. Our perception of evil is based primarily on what we're told and what happens to people. Certainly the experience I went through was anything but enlightening, but we don't consider those terms with most of nature on this planet. So are they highly evolved? They must be, because they're very clever, and their crafts, or the crafts that they use, seem to come and go in the blink of an eye. So I believe that most of the answers may be linked with quantum technology, and certainly as a species, I'm sure that we ourselves will eventually catch up with that and have more of an understanding, and moving us away from this rigid nuts and bolts aspect of the phenomena. And this is the thing, because we're dealing with one that's physical and a part that's non-physical.
Johnny Webb's got a question. Go ahead, Johnny.
It's two parts, and it'll come on to what you've just spoke about there, Philip. But it's going back to Ronald talking about in America there were experiences where UFOs were flying over air bases and missile silos, and then
Maelstrom Air Force Base with Dr. Roberts or Captain Robert Salas, where they shut down the ICBM. Yeah.
Exactly, but the interesting thing is, Captain Robert Sellers and his wife came on this show, Dr. J Radio Live, and it was them that they both disclosed that they were also experiencers, that they'd been abducted and they'd gone through an experience of alien experiences. And I found that quite strange, because what you were asking for, in the sense of why don't we get that, we did actually get that, but only in the context as we discuss it, that even people that are high rankers and in charge of missile silos, there have also had experiences, and even through I suppose being asked to do what's these when you take your test and you tell if you're lying and stuff. I think they test staff every
polygraph.
Yeah, they do these polygraphs every couple of months to their staff, obviously, to see if they're sane. And even they were passing these tests all the time. So what's clear is there is definitely an alien intervention, even among, American officials that are supposedly in guard of everything.
Yes.
But then to bring it back from Philip, you were mentioning the differences. It's not nuts and bolts now. It's more organic. It's alive. It's more interaction through spirit realm, through sort of dimensional thought, or sort of interaction. And this is what.
I will say to you that we people like ourselves are considered conspiracy theorists because we turn that finger of doubt onto the inquiring mind. It's a beautiful psychological weapon. But think about this, the Hadron Collider, they're wanting to make a bigger one. Okay,
Yes.
This has just come out. They're making a bigger one. So our arguments are, and I'm sure Dr. J and Johnny and all the other good people on this radio show will consider this fact. They've obviously found something. You're not going to build a bigger one if there isn't something you've discovered. And I think that what they possibly could be doing, that the good public will never have any information about, is they're trying to split open a dimension. I believe that. I've always believed that. And that the smaller model, they've obviously discovered something incredible through the Hadron Accelerator, the atom smasher as it's known, and that this is why they want to build, and they're going to build this bigger one. And Professor Stephen Hawking actually warned, didn't he, of the dangers of doing this. But unfortunately, where learned men go, and if science opens up the Holy Grail to all of creation, they're going to do it. So should we be worried? Not just yet. I mean, we're still sitting in our chairs here, so we haven't been sucked into the quantum realm yet. So I do believe that with regards to the UFO phenomena, it certainly has manifested and molded within our mythology. I mean, Dr. Jack Vallée stated that, the gnomes and fairies and gnomes and all these other creatures, they seem to evolve with our mythology. They seem to be one step ahead. Now they're these greys. What will they appear in another 50 years' time? Who knows? I will tell you an interesting story. When I do readings all the time, and I had a chap come for a reading many years ago, and he was a businessman, rocked up in a very posh car, and he sat down. And when I'd finished reading for him, I said to him, "Sir, can I ask you, why is it that you look so low? Why do you look so despondent?" And he told me that he had been witness to an event that happened in the Skull experiment, which was a psychical research centre up in Norfolk, where these under strict scientific conditions, where they would prove evidence of life after death through actual physical things being brought through. And this guy, who's a businessman, looked me in the eye and said, I have seen what we will evolve into in 1,000,000 years' time. And he said, we are light. And this guy was so black and white, Dr. J. I mean, you meet people and when someone is telling you the truth when they look you in the eye and they tell you this. So from our concept of what we're dealing with is certainly multifaceted, Johnny, as well, because it is so diverse within its range and within its, its interaction with us humans. So this is the really hard part that we're trying to deal with. I do believe that there are intelligences, physical intelligences, that are warping into this dimension, but I also believe that there are what I would call interdimensionals as well.
I'm going to ask this question of both of you. It's 3 parts. I'm going to start with Ronnie. First of all, part 1, do you believe that extraterrestrials are walking amongst us right now, like Dr. David Jacobs believes? The second part is, how many abductions have you had in total throughout your life, and are they still continuing? And the third part is, do you know, is there anything that they showed you in any subsequent abductions outside of the Cheshire Cat, or anything they told you about the future of humanity? And I'm going to start with Ronnie before I take the same questions to Philip.
Yes, I do believe, Dr. J, that they are walking amongst us. I would agree with the good doctor there as well. It's certainly very, very possible. Secondly, I've forgotten the second question. I'm so sorry, Dr. J.
The second part was, aside from how many abductions did you have was one of them, and are you still being abducted today? And the other one was, did, aside from the Cheshire Cat, did they tell you or show you anything specifically about what's to come with regards to humanity?
Right. No, the only one I remember was when I was 13, seeing these strange entities, these doctors, as I call them. And the third question, no, I had no insights. They gave me no insights. Basically, when I was on board that thing, they were going to do an operation. They were damn well not going to be deflected from it. I was powerless. They did it. And then they just screwed up my head afterwards with the Cheshire Cat. So no, in answer to that, I've only, as far as I know, have had one abduction. And they didn't show me any insights, or if they did, I must have forgotten. But they have given rise to these UFOs, these damn things I keep seeing every 2 or 3 years. Philip and I see them up close, as well as the triangular ship I explained earlier. But yes, that answers.
Let me throw one quick thing in here real quick. I've always argued that if people are seeing craft, they're either on their way to or on their way back from abducting someone.
Right.
And if you guys are seeing them regularly, chances are, I mean, obviously this is just a speculation, that both of you are still being taken. They just have the ability to shut your mind off, so you don't have conscious recall. Let's take those same questions to Philip.
Okay, in answer to your first question, Dr. J, yes, I do believe that they walk among us. I've always considered that as a possibility. Second question, there possibly could have been another abduction, but the only time that I remember that was waking up and hearing a rumble over the house, and my bladder was bursting about 3 a.m, and my T-shirt was back to front. So I'm not stating that I'm not stating that that is what happened, but I remembered vividly because I had this top that's of a North American Indian. Yes, I know, I love the North American Indians. I think they're cool, and if you put it on back to front, the back is higher, so it would be so it'd be uncomfortable to wear. So that was the only other time, and I really, to be honest with you, I can't remember. I'd say 8 years ago, could have been 10 years ago, but that was the only other time that I thought that something could have possibly happened with regards to what we call an abduction. The only one that I remember clearly was the one that happened in 1989. And with regards to your last question, I don't recall them showing me anything with regards to the future. What I was more concerned about was my question to one of them afterwards. As I said, I didn't complete the story because it's too long-winded. But I have explained this in the media on this side of the world, the pond. But
we've got about half an hour, so just go for it.
Well, when they'd finished what they'd done on the craft, and this grey, the things were retracted, I got to that part. The grey then took me to the wall. What I saw was a wall to the craft that opened, and I became upset because he wanted me to get out. And I'm like, you want me to jump out? I'm scared of heights. So when it was opened, the only way I can explain it to you was that it was daylight. I could see that our house from below. And it was daylight, so God knows how long I've been up there for. And as I remembered then floating, and there were two greys that I was not to look at, who I suppose were assisting in this, coming down to the ground. What was really bizarre was when I was coming down, there was another craft where our conservatory is, a smaller one. And I don't know what happened to the guys, these two greys, or the ship. They must have cleared off. I don't know. But what faced me, and I have drawn this has been documented, was another grey, and he stood in front of me, and he looked ridiculous. He looked mean. He wore a tall, pointed hat. He wore a one-piece uniform with knee-length boots, a khaki uniform, and his arms were folded in a threatening manner. And he was looking at me like really, really like I'd done something bad. Now, this is the really strange part. It felt like I'd known him somewhere. What level, I don't know. I can't remember. I've tried all these years and I can't remember. However, I thought, right, you give me a hard time, you do these things to me, I'm going to ask you a question, and this question will damn well give me the answers to what you guys are. I said to him, how the hell am I able to get through locked and bolted doors? And do you know what? His eyes, he looked shocked. Now, if you've seen animated plastic, it's quite like a toy or something. It's quite shocking, because the look he gave me was complete, total, like how you're asking me that question. There was no feeling of any form of comeback from him in terms of telepathy or communication. It was more of like a visual connection. Well, then he started to speak, but it was a low rasp. He lifted his head up to the other side of his craft, and very much like what my brother had done going back earlier when he went into that trance, if you remember. And he rasped these words, and I remember then crashing through the doors and coming through the hall so fast. And when I came back into my body, as I would call it, I got up and I had a nosebleed and I felt really sick. I felt awful. So that was where my interest within the abduction, where people say, oh, I've had this abduction and this has happened to me. But then when you really dig into most of them, they do apparently occur on an etheric level or a psychic level. And this is what interested me, because I'm very honest, Dr. J, and I'm very upfront with everything that happens to me and has happened to me. I claim, I don't claim sensationalism. In fact, I've suffered under the hammer of ridicule from the media machine on this side of the country because people didn't understand it. But I've dealt with that now, because my main focus of attention is what this is, and like we all are, we're all interested in this, and I think that it's important for us to speculate on different theories. But it was that question about how am I able to get through locked and bolted doors. That is what interested me more than anything. So are the Greys able to project or take out that part of us which is the soul, and when it links in with them, because we're operating on the same frequency, they can interact with us? And as we know, that whatever they do to the soul may still affect the physical body, as healers do, without touching someone. So this whole idea about the nuts and bolts aspect and also the etheric or interdimensional aspect, I think both of them are very important, and I think we both have to look at them to analyze what we consider may possibly be going on.
Have you both noticed any changes in yourselves? I mean, for instance, aside from having an interest in UFOs since you've been taken, because that's a given, that's kind of who took you, but some people, after they're taken, subconsciously they're implanted ideas. For instance, the earth is about to be destroyed, so you have to do something about it, like save the rainforest. And all of a sudden, these people who were never environmentalists, all of a sudden are tree huggers, sort of that sort of thing. Did you notice that maybe you've started paying attention to things that you never cared for before, having interests in things that you never really wanted to do or pursue, or even having a spike in some sort of intelligence, compassion, or anything like that? And this applies, like I said, to both of you.
Well, this is Ronnie. I did notice something after the doctors. I did become quite artistic. Very, very artistic. I mean, I wasn't concerned with, I know it sounds callous, but I had no concern for the world at the time or anything to do with peace or any of that. But I certainly became very, very artistic. And on the question I missed, I'm sorry, Dr. J, you asked if I had developed any psychic abilities. No, on that note, I hadn't. I couldn't raise the skin of a rice pudding, I'm afraid. I did sit in recently. I sat in circle for 4 years and I could get absolutely nothing. I failed miserably. But that's a very interesting point, because after the doctors, I seemed to boom in artisticness. I loved art. I loved drawing, composing images. And it has helped me enormously, especially with my writing as well. I mean, yes, I would say yes, artistically, yes.
It's almost as if they jolted that part of your brain for the creativity. I mean, that's fantastic. Philip, what about you?
Well, I mean, the only way I can explain it, well, they haven't locked me up, Dr. J, not yet anyway, is that I had this, when I was younger, I had this real fear of dying, of death. And I think that's always been with me, because living in this world, I'm quite a nervous person, and I've dealt with that most of my life, because a lot of people make me nervous, because most people are not honest, and they're quite bad people. So I kind of like have a great empathy towards the good people and for the truth. And I think I have noticed that I have got more compassionate for that truth. I think that, when we're dealing with the levels of the mind, of consciousness, and living in a world where people tell you that you live and you die and that's it, makes no sense to me. And then we have this other problem with the UFOs, and people are saying, no, what you're seeing is delusions of grandeur. They don't really exist. So I became really passionate to try to discover the truth of soul survival, that we are all brilliant, that we are all part of something very big. And if people can just open up their minds a little bit to the concept of how brilliant they can become within their potentiality, I think that changes everything. As with regards to the UFO stuff, I spend most of nearly all of my time digging and researching, and I know that there are a lot of bogus reports out there and people that claim all sorts of fantastic things, but I think you need to know people in order to understand where they're coming from a truthful level. And I think that now is fueling me to try to amalgamate what we are, where we come from, why we're here. And it could be that we're part of a universal plan that we've remained so ignorant about. I mean, if you look at our world, this is another thing, an interesting thing which has started to happen with me, is that I've woken up. It's almost like the system that we serve, the mechanical system that we serve, is basically telling us that you are a servant, you're a slave, you have to get up, you have to work, and you have very little time with your family, and you pay your taxes, you pay your bills, and work until you drop. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. There has to be more to our existence than just, biological machines working for a system that cares nothing for you, and then trying to rub your nose into the ground by saying UFOs don't exist and life and death doesn't exist. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think from the inside of my soul, I'm passionate to try to discover the truth of that. I may never reach that part. If you look at all the ufologists and the other people, they've been spending years trying to find out what we're dealing with. But I think now a lot of brilliant minds today within this world as well, from those minds of the past, are leading us into an area where there may be some kind of understanding which will make us more aware that we are beautiful, that we are brilliant, and that if we stop dividing ourselves against one another and working as one unit, that would unify consciousness. Can you imagine what it would be like if every person was able to utilize their consciousness into an area that they could contribute to, as opposed to doing a job that they hate? I mean, that would change the world radically. So I have changed quite a lot. Do I attribute that to the abduction? I don't know. Do I attribute that to the psychic part? I don't know. But I have a feeling deep inside that it's possible that there was a trigger there somewhere.
You mentioned the bogus report and the fact that this spurred you into paying attention. And real quick, what you mentioned, the consciousness, if people really were aware and started to pay more attention, I think we'd be living in a far more peaceful world. We'd be getting along more, and the crime would really almost go. So that's like a utopia that I just hope we could achieve someday. Real quick, the bogus reports you mentioned, a lot of people, either some people want to just belong, and that's why they come up with some of these stories. And that's a handful of people. And of course, there's the misidentification, which takes a good chunk of it. Mm-hmm. Then there are those that are strictly disinformation, and that's sad, because it's as if this field didn't already have that ridicule enough to have these bogus people, skeptics who are paid big money to go out and belittle people who have undergone serious traumatic experiences dealing with non-terrestrial intelligent entities, and to basically say, hey, look, it's all in your head. You should belong in an insane asylum. Nothing good comes out of that. And I think I'm thankful that our society now in 2019 has come so far in the last 30 to 40 years. Like you mentioned, when this happened, Ronnie in 82, Philip in 89, these times you would have been laughed at when I was talking about UFOs then, because abduction was taboo, way taboo. But even just saying you believed in extraterrestrials and flying saucers, you were labeled as one of those tin hats. And it's just really sad.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, I mean, after, as Dr. J, as I was saying about, after my incident, with the doctors, it was only then when I started to express interest in the UFOs. And one that is very well famous, and of course from your wonderful country, is the Roswell crash, which I do believe happened.
Yes.
I mean, there's no smoke without fire. I mean, that's what spurred my interest into these things. But you can understand my confusion with, even then, with these books by certain authors I shan't mention, who had these fanciful flights to the moon and Venus.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, as a teenager, you're thrown, because we didn't have access to things like the internet then. I mean, we weren't in the dark ages, of course, but the only material you could get was from the library or from the TV. And even then, as you well know, I mean, there wasn't much on the UFO subject. We had Arthur C. Clarke's Unsolved Mysteries or something, I think it was called.
Yes.
Mysterious World.
But it always ended on a very sour note. Now, I love Arthur C. Clarke. I absolutely adore him. I've read a lot of his books, but it always ended rather sourly, because it's like he had this lovely balloon and it was filled with this wonderful helium, and then he'd get a pin afterwards and just pop it. But was it? You see what I mean? But the Roswell crash, now I know something happened there. We all know, because there's no smoke without fire. You know, what they retrieved was foreign. It was not of this planet, I don't believe at all. But I've always known that that case is absolutely true. I know, like everything, it's controversial, and you'll have the people who will lie, and you'll have the people who will elaborate, and you'll have the truth, the people who will tell the truth. But I think if we're level-headed, we all know. Let's be honest, we know something very strange occurred there. That incident fascinates me.
It fascinates me too. And I always dream of the day that because this happened to us, humanity, all of humanity, and to deny us this knowledge that not only are we being visited, people are being taken, but we have possession of a craft with bodies that didn't survive. One day, I truly hope that we can go into the craft like as a museum and look at it and maybe touch certain things. And that's not the only crash, but the reason why Roswell is so darn famous, because that's the only time in recorded history where the United States government, specifically the military, came out and flat out said, we've received a crash happened from extraterrestrials, and we've recovered bodies. It wasn't until the very next day that the story was shot down, but because the military had that press release first is why this case will forever be cemented in history.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I mean,
what was also interesting was Colonel Corso came out with like items from that crash retrieval and given them to like the military industrial complex,
IBM, and places like that.
And one of those things was the eye lens that was taken from the Santilli video of the Roswell autopsy. And they clearly showed you opening the eye, taking out a black lens, leaving the original eye behind in a big white blob is what it was. And then this eye lens was given to literally Colonel Corso, and that was given out to DuPont and other companies, you know, that were sort of, you know, in that sort of industrial complex, but working into giving it into the mainstream. And today, you know, night vision goggles and all of these sort of things, Stargazer, these are all implemented from those original sources, and they were still given and used in the UK there, you know, for night vision helicopter pilots in those little Apache gunships. You know, they're using the same technology, just advanced from those original sort of like findings.
Yes. Fiber optics as well. Kathleen Marden, we've been talking to Kathleen Marden, and we have agreed that it does seem, or it could be highly possible, but the ship didn't crash by accident. But have you ever heard of an idea that it could have been planted, that it was deliberately downed?
That I haven't heard, and I want to hear what you have to say. The other hypothesis I've heard is that there was two of them, and they crashed. One sort of exploded, the other one landed about approximately 100 miles away, and I believe it was the St. Augustine Plains.
Yes, I mean, with that, yes, I have heard of that. I mean, we're never going to know, but the point being is when Kathleen Marden was discussing this with Philip and myself, we did actually discuss whether it had actually deliberately crashed with synthetic bodies on board. I mean, they were very advanced. For the sole purpose of us actually advancing, because we've been so behind technologically for so long, and we have. I know that the past efforts of our ancestors have all been wiped clean, but we have taken us ages to reach an electronic or industrial revolution. It's just strange after that we really did excel. Also, the fact of them perhaps being biological androids, if that makes any sense. If these masters could make, certainly if I was super intelligent and you had every means at your disposal technologically, you would certainly make troops or scientists to act as your eyes and ears. It could be possible that the crew on board that ship were someone else's eyes and ears. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing I also wanted to ask you both, especially since both of you have developed an interest and, of course, trying to understand what happened to you, studying other reports, like, for instance, Roswell, I wanted to get both of your opinion as to how many different species you both think have visited us at one time or another, whether it be, now, 5 years ago, or even say 500,000 years ago, just based on what your own research has shown, not necessarily with your own experiences, because as you both mentioned, the experiences you had was, Philip, you talked about the greenish grays, and Ronnie, you talked about these that literally you couldn't see what they were.
That's right, yes. Well, there must be, from my own point of view, definitely, there are a number of them here now. I mean, from what I've gathered or learned, you have the greys and you have the mantids, and you certainly have the formidable reptilian creatures. Now, as opposed to past our ancestors, yes, I think a lot has been hidden or lost in archives or stone, but I think the greys were quite prominent, but certainly a number of species, yes.
I think that the greys have been here for a long time. When I came back from Arizona, because I went over there some years ago, I remembered that I got this little badge of the greys on it, and it was quite a striking portrait of them. And I remembered relaxing in the plane coming back to England, and I don't know what it was, but I just had this feeling that they were very old, very, very old. So I believe the greys have been around for a very long time. The reptilians, I remembered I had a hard time. I think sometimes when something's new psychologically, it takes a long time to be accepted within the psyche. But I understand a little bit more about the reptilians, and I believe that they've been around, or they are elusive. So I believe that the greys and the reptilians are the main ones that I believe that have created quite a lot of media attention, and certainly within the Hollywood machine. I've heard about the whites, the tall whites, and I've also heard about the little blues. I've never seen any of them. They're very rare, the blue-grey things. But they're there could be possibly more, but the only ones that I've really focused on are the greys themselves. And it's every possibility we've got more visiting us.
I'm actually glad you brought up the tall whites, because I've heard of those. I have not heard of the little blue ones, but yet I'm not surprised, because there are so many. And if you take and factor in the different dimensions, the different galaxies, I mean, we are literally, there are so many possibilities out there. And even if you look outside of the Goldilocks zones, and we even in the Goldilocks zones, that where the planets are, comparable to Earth, having water, oxygen, not too hot, not too cold. But what happens if the creatures are not carbon-based? What happens if they don't breathe oxygen? Well, that just opens up a whole new spectrum of what they can live at. So with that being said, I absolutely believe that there are far, far more many species that come here. The only crazy thing I have to say is they're all humanoid, meaning they're all bipedal. That's the only consistency I see among the different reports, is that the legs, the arms, the two eyes, the nose, the mouth, pretty much seems to be standard all the way through. Real quick, Johnny's got a question. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah, hi guys. Well, I'd like to go back to Ronald, for instance. I know you've got a new book out, The Archons, and Never Make a Deal with the Devil. Can you tell us a little bit about that upcoming book, and also the illustrations, the images that you show of these sort of reptilian beings? Are they familiar to you and to Philip? You know, are they similar to your occurrences?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Now, although I never saw a reptilian, as we would call physically, the medium that Philip discussed that we went to see, I went to see her because even 20 years ago, I was still skeptical. I'm terrible. I just want facts or proof like the rest of us. But I went to see this medium and she befriended us. I mean, the evidence she brought through was absolutely incredible. You couldn't fault her. Because I was so hard. I was stone-faced. I didn't give my name, but she brought everything correct through and more. It wasn't this wishy-washy stuff like, is anyone there? Well, she did past life regression with me. It's past life regression. And I saw 4 incarnations. Because she'd said that Philip and I were originally on Atlantis, I was desperate to see Atlantis. I never saw Atlantis. This is what happened. She put us professionally under hypnosis, and I had 4 visions of past life, and one of them involved these reptilians. One of them, the one I've drawn, the Archons, is actually based on the reptilian agenda. Yes, you're quite right to suggest that. I don't know why. I just have this affinity with the reptilians. I know they're bad. I don't think they're all bad. It's like us, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly, but these are. But I saw one of them in this vision, and he is the one they didn't have wings. I mean, but I've drawn them with wings to give them the illusion of being demonic, because being once angels fallen from grace, they would inherit some traits of their former selves, their former beauty. But the reptilian I saw shocked me in this past life regression, and it was so bizarre and out of phase from what I was shown with the others, because I was all people. But these were assisting, I think they were the Aztecs or someone. They were there with them, the winged serpent. So yes, I mean, the Archons is based on the negative side of these beings. Now we call it hell, but as I referred to in my novel, it could be that the religious section was quite they just labeled it that, and they gave them this name, demons. But it could be that, like with CERN, it's a dimension where they come from, because in my book they have a governmental force, the core, and they are governed. Of course they'd be organized and structured. They have a sovereign. But yes, the reptilian is he is born from this image I saw, and that's really what spurred it. This was 20 years ago. That's what spurred it with the reptilians, Johnny. Yes.
Real quick, you both already answered the question about the hypnosis that I meant to ask you, and you just talked about past lives or being able to see that. But I'm assuming, since I didn't hear you say that the actual hypnosis unveiled any other abductions. That's the case. Obviously, the hypnotherapist wasn't able to take you back to other times that you were possibly taken, to either of you?
No, no, not at all. And I will tell you, Dr. J, that I had a hypnotist come to try and retrieve a certain memory that we couldn't break. I just don't know. It just doesn't work with me. I can't seem to be hypnotized at all. So with regards to that, no, not at all. No.
Because you both had trauma, being taken so young and having to come to terms with seeing things like creatures that don't belong, that are non-terrestrial, since you did not have an interest in this topic before, and then what you both experienced, which was a form of trauma, clearly a form of trauma. What would you say to other people who have been taken as far as advice to help them cope with the trauma? And I want to get both your opinions on this and both your answers.
Well, I would say, and this is Philip here, I would say that to tell the person that they're not going mad, that they have to try to find someone that they can trust and talk to. There's a lot of groups out there, and I know that in the great US of A, there's lots of groups and that you can go to for counselling. Kathleen Marden with MUFON, they have groups of people that they can help, and they certainly do help. I would say to the person that through a gradual process of acceptance and listening to other people who've been through these experiences will assure them that they're not going mad and that they can try and find it within themselves to get through it. So I believe that, other people can help them. There is help out there in the world. It's not just, you're not going to suffer in silence and I didn't. After a while, I found people. So I was reaching out, and the experience itself probably is there to try and get you to reach out and to connect with other people.
Ronnie?
If I could just take you back just a moment to your hypnotic regressions. I know that like Bud Hopkins and Dr. David Jacobs use a certain technique, but there's also a technique that Dolores Cannon set up, which she said was given to her for an alien interaction, and it's been very popular. The quantum healing technique, the QHTT, I think it is. I wonder what version you were hypnotized by.
It wasn't.
Have you tried that technique?
No, I've heard of that. Kathleen Marden explained that. It's something that I've got to look into, to be honest with you, because I never heard of that one. But the other guy that tried it, no, he was just a hypnotist. So obviously there is a screen memory that's so strong that won't break. So I would certainly look into that, most definitely.
Yeah, that's the QHTT technique by Dolores Cannon, and it's been used by a lot of people now. And it's certainly it deals with more high consciousness. Having your high consciousness release information for you, so you can have predetermined questions, and then the high consciousness somehow interacts with you. At an area that I wish I could be in contact with all the time, but unfortunately, it only works under that sort of technique. But very interesting stuff. But back to you, Dr. J. Sorry.
We got about 10 minutes left before we have to go off air, and I wanted to use this time to ask you if there's anything that I haven't asked you that you think is relevant to talk about for all the people listening, especially for the people listening who have also been taken, especially and in light of the fact that you were able to give them advice in how to cope with this trauma, because that's something I hear regularly from people. A lot of people go into the state of depression, and some people even describe the abduction process as almost like similar to rape. They have very similar signs to victims of rape.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, I wrote a book. I had to bring it through Amazon because my brother and I lost our publishers. They both passed over. And I've put all of this in a book that I called A Passage Through Eternity, The Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens. I had to keep the title simple so that people could relate to what I was saying. So a lot of the information, if people want, not as an advertising ploy, but as a means to reaching out to people, I've explained everything in that book that happened to me and what it's like. So, a lot of people have said they love the book, that it's helped them. And but also, yes, your statement of rape does come to mind. And when I was invited onto TV programs here in England, one show in particular was very degrading, and I realized at that point just how the media machine worked. That's another story. But I would say to people that if you read other people's experiences, and that can sometimes help heal people. But at the end of the day, it's reaching out to people and others and saying to them that you're going to be okay, you're going to get through it. I mean, I'm still here today as a testament to that, and it has changed me quite a lot. I believe the experiences have somehow made me more empathic and more understanding of our place here within this time in this space.
Let me ask you about disclosure. Do you think that our governments or the world governments will finally tell us what is going on? Or do you think it's not going to happen in, say, the President of the United States or with Theresa May, or maybe a group of world leaders getting on simultaneously broadcasting and saying, hey, we've been lying to you for decades, just so you know, you're not alone?
No.
Or do you think it's going to happen slowly via the extraterrestrials unveiling themselves the way they are now? And I'm going to start with Ronnie, and then let's go to Philip on this.
Yep, Dr. J, that is a marvelous question. The governments will never, ever give us disclosure. They will never. Let's face it, they lie to us on a daily basis, and they keep lying. I do believe that the extraterrestrial presence is known by military corps. They're much wiser to it than we are. Perhaps they're keeping it secret because it's horrendous, or it might be beneficial to them. I think you're right. I think if it does happen, it is going to come from the aliens themselves.
Yeah, and I believe that exactly what you believe, Ronnie. I mean, look at England with Brexit. I mean, they can't even get that right.
Yeah.
You tell anyone about a water shortage, everyone's out buying up the water. You tell them there's a petrol crisis, they're out filling up their cars and cans with petrol. So, I mean, if it was ever revealed that we have extraterrestrial presence, I think that will topple the world over. There'll be people like your good selves and our good selves that would be able to understand and appreciate that, but a lot of people wouldn't. I believe it would either have to come if there was a world catastrophe, or I believe that the extraterrestrials themselves would probably do it through people, because a lot of people now are opening up, they're coming together, they're opening up, and I think it's teaching us more about ourselves and consciousness and about the world. So a lot more people are accepting of that. I think more people now so than ever before. So probably the extraterrestrials are working through people to do that. They're using us to bring the message through to the masses. And I think eventually then it's almost like that point where everyone stops. And I believe that the united consciousness may reveal something. I hope that would happen, but I certainly don't think it's going to come through the governments, no.
I definitely agree with you both. And the amount of people who have been taken and have had contact is in the millions at this point. I mean, some people say it's as high as 1 in 40. That's an astonishingly large number. But because of how our society has moved to where people are more open to talk about this, like you both said, I think the fact that since people are talking more and more about it and being believed far more now than ever in history, that may be the only way to come about. And especially what you mentioned too about having a catastrophe, that might be another opportunity to be to make themselves known to everybody else. That way the skeptics can finally stop bashing people. Now, real quick, since we do got literally about 5 minutes left, both of you said you still see craft on a pretty regular basis. And I want to get from both of you the answers of how often do you see them, what kinds of shapes are you seeing them, and how close, because I remember you saying some of them have been fairly close.
Yes, there was my niece actually recorded 3 of them that were coming our way after we'd finished a meal one night. And my sister had gone home early from the mill. It wasn't early, it was about late at night, earlier than we'd left, and she filmed them. And I know that Jason Gleaves here in England had done a video of them and analysed them, and there were 3 white lights that came over and stopped over our house that were in a triangular formation and then moved into a line and moved off. And this is witnessed by a lot of other people. I know that my brother's seen the triangular craft, and he saw the orbs coming through what he would call inner space with the older guy, Tom Senior. The ones that we've seen are normally like lights, and one that we saw many years ago as another triangular one, but more of an upright triangle than a sidewards one. So from our perspective, you never got the camera ready, but my niece had the camera. She pulled her car over and she was taking the film of them. And then we were in the car, she was trying to contact me on the phone, and they were right over our house. And I found some other people, some other witnesses who'd taken pictures of them also. So that's going into my new UFO book that I'm working on. Ronnie?
It's every 2 or 3 years, Dr.
Yeah.
J, to see them. It's always, and they're always unexpected. Ironically, you never have a camera.
Yeah, right. It's almost as if they're coming because they don't want you to record them. You know,
right.
that it's like they can read your thoughts from possibly another
Yes.
dimension or from that distance.
Yes, it's like the X-Files. You're shown all this stuff, and we have seen them, and then they leave you with absolutely nothing. They take all the proof away. It's all like you've got nothing, as I said before. Whereas the proof, we can only speculate. They give us nothing. As I said, they're like shadows.
Well, that's a very, very good point, is how to describe them as shadows. And, it begs the question of why do they not want to leave any proof behind? And again, that's only speculation. And since we just got a couple minutes left, briefly, what do you think is the reason they want you to both forget, because they have this uncanny ability to make you forget what happened? And why do you also think, aside from that, why do you think they want you to forget? And also, why do you think they don't want to leave you with proof?
I wished I could answer that. I have no idea. If that applies to us, that would apply to everyone else, all the good people who have seen them being taken.
Yes.
I've always said that perhaps they're just being kind. It could be possible that they're just being kind to wipe our memories. I mean, or screw them up, as they did with mine, to screw my head up with the cat. I don't know. I can't answer that, I'm afraid, Dr. J. Philip, can you?
No, I believe that if we did remember everything, it might seriously screw our minds up. I think we'll all end up in a psychiatric ward.
Yeah. But fortunately, like I said, nowadays, we are far, far better in that terms.
Oh, yes,
now,
yeah.
We are coming to the end of the show in a couple minutes, and I wanted to, real quick, Johnny, if you can make that question super quick, if you guys can give a super quick answer, we can get this last one in. Go ahead, Johnny.
Okay, it's back to Philip, actually. You've been a clairvoyant for a few years now, and I just wanted to ask you, I worked recently with a Dutch fellow who was also a clairvoyant medium, Robert Vandenbroek, but he also had a connection that he says was to the other side and to these aliens. With your clairvoyancy, have you ever had any sort of, other than, say, souls, departed souls, other life forms of humans, have you ever had any other entities or sort of weird experiences come through?
No, not at all. Only the human consciousness, not alien. No, not at all. Nothing.
Thank you.
Now, because we are coming to the end of the time, I wanted to thank you both, and I definitely would like to do this again, and I definitely would like to see and check out your books. But before we go, I want to get some final statements from both of you, and of course, plug in anything that you want the listeners to know, like your book, where people can find it, and if you have any websites, by all means, the floor is yours.
I've just released A Passage of Eternity. You can get that through Amazon, The Enigma of the Dead, UFOs and Aliens, a website, www.philipkinsella.com, and just check me out online. Ronnie?
I've just released, as Johnny has mentioned, a novel called The Archons, which deals with the negative side of these things. And I've got a website at simply put, ronaldkinsella.com.
Nice. And Johnny Webb, anything you'd like to tell the listeners before we go off?
It's been an honor to be back on the Dr. J Radio Live show, and I look forward to listening to many more exciting guests that he's able to get. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
And of course, I want to give some shout outs. First of all, my assistant producer and also VP of Operations, Josh Cheris. And of course, my social media manager, who also has a website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com, Pam Brettenberg. I want to give them both shout outs, as well as the owner of this station, UPRN, Mr. Joe Montaldo. And in the UK, from Deprogrammed Radio Network, I want to thank JC for also carrying this show. Remember, folks, the only thing you have to remember when it's with regards to the show is the name of it, Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. For instance, the website, drjradiolive.com. Every social media outlet from YouTube, BitTube, Facebook, Minds, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, you name it, Pinterest, Google Plus. It's all the same thing at DRJ Radio Live. Join us again Monday night, same time, same place. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. For those of you in the United States, you have a good night. And for those of you in the UK and Europe, you all have a good morning. With that being said, this is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off.